Welcome, everybody. We're going to get started promptly at 11, but welcome everybody to our Get Real Project Trust Advisor Associates.
Hey, Helen, we have somebody else on camera. Hello.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, thank you.
I'm sorry?
So we're encouraging everybody to put cameras on, changing it up this time. So everybody
All right.
feels inclined. We are going to keep you on mute.
Hello.
So we can hear the audio, but 1 second. Tracy, can I mute all without muting you guys? I don't want to.
No, you have to then quickly unmute us. Bear with us, everybody. We're using a different aspect of Zoom than we've used before and trying out some new things. So
if everybody can mute their microphones, we're going to try to do that on our end too, but it'd be helpful.
Bruce, Tim, Becky, Dirk, Lori, Alan, Ella. Hello, hello. I am a trust temperament connector, so all the faces make me inordinately happy. Yeah. And the smiles, even though I can't hear you. There's still this weird phenomenon, right? This invisible mute curtain in all our virtual tools, which I'm still wrestling with. If we got a few more in the waiting room, Jason, if you aren't yet a Zoom super user, just give it a few more days and you will be. We all will be. But a couple little helpful tips. If you do like seeing everybody on camera, if you haven't discovered gallery view yet, upper right corner of the screen, if it says gallery view, click on it. We call that the Brady Bunch view, and you can see up to 25 people at a time and page through. You can toggle to speaker view if you then just want to see who's the person talking, because in gallery view it can be hard to find them. And if you don't have that option, if you go to the middle of your screen to the right of the green bar where it says you're viewing Tracy Delskamp's screen and you click on the view options menu, that last option, side by side mode, should enable both gallery view, and then it also will give you a little gray bar that'll show up when you mouse over to the left of your screen, and that allows you to adjust the relative size of the Brady Bunch and the relative size of the slide deck.
So it's right at 11 o'clock. We're going to get started. Everybody who's joining, thank you for joining our Trust Matters webinar. Today's topic is 5 best practices for managing the biggest client relationship derailer, which is fear. Very timely for everything that's going on. It's hosted by Andrea Howe, who's the founder of the Get Real Project and also a great partner of Trusted Advisor Associates. A couple housekeeping things. Everybody that's joining, if you guys can all, we're trying to mute your microphones manually, but if you can also do that just to make sure there's no talking going on during the webinar or background noise. Video is welcome. We're encouraging video today. We want to see everybody's faces. Tracy, you can go to the next slide. Great. So this is the 11th webinar in our series. After the webinar, you are going to receive a recording and a presentation deck with additional resources. Please turn on your camera, as we mentioned, at your game. And there's a chat feature. Most of us are all pro Zoom users in the pandemic lockdown, but in case you don't know, on the very bottom or wherever your navigation bar floats, there's a little chat button. You can, my name is Jason Gluskin, so you can ask me individual questions if you want, or you can ask questions to the entire group. We are going to answer questions and probably take a break midway through for some questions and answer questions at the end. And there's going to be a poll at the end quickly to ask for your feedback on the webinar. We can, and Trust Advisor /webinars on the bottom if you want to watch any past webinars. We're going to have some upcoming ones that are going to be posted in the next week or so, and we have one booked for the fall, which we're trying to nail down the date. It's already up there. Can move on to the next slide. So I'm going to pass this over to Andrea, but Andrea is the founder of the Get Real Project. She co-wrote the Trusted Advisor Field Book with Charles Green, who's the CEO of Trusted Advisor Associates. And Andrea, why don't you take it away from here?
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Jason. So I want to say first and foremost, thank you to all of you for accepting what I'm sure was your 467th webinar invitation in the last 3 weeks. I very much appreciate you coming. Very excited to see the registration list. Such an extraordinary, diverse group of industries represented. We've got banking, financial services, medical, energy, environmental, insurance, IT, recruiting, pharma, advertising, defense, janitorial products, academia, global professional services. I'm going to pause us so that we can mute whatever's happening there in the background. Beautiful, thank you. And we've got anywhere from, one-person consulting practices to people who work for firms that have, over 100,000 staff members. So welcome, welcome, welcome to all. As Jason said, I'm the co-author of the Trusted Advisor Fieldbook with my partner in crime, Charlie. Number 14, in fact, April is the 14th year. It's our anniversary of working in partnership together. And with the Get Real project, we focus primarily on what we call deep dive. We're like the deep dive division of Trusted Advisor Associates. So we're focusing on mastery level skill building and mindset work in influence, trust, relationship building. That's what we're all about. Next slide. If you would, Tracy, I'm going to ask you all to chime in so I can hear, in air quotes, your voices, at least hear you through the chat. My question to you, honest answer, if you had to describe how you are in this moment as we begin this virtual conversation, avoiding words like good, fine, and okay in the interest of being more descriptive, what word would you choose? Please chat your reply. Honestly, like, how are you just right now in this moment? I'm going to choose, my word is standing, which is in part a declaration of my resilience right now, but it's also literal. I could not tolerate any longer sitting at my desk interacting with a computer, so I bought the standing desk extension, and this is my first time leading a webinar standing up. So fasten your seatbelts. Who knows what in the heck is going to happen. But I see a whole wide range of words coming in, which is no surprise. This has been a theme for several weeks now, ranging from overwhelmed, concerned, coping, apprehensive, edgy, absolutely anxious, tenuous, stressed. And then we've got positive, motivated, hopeful, happy, content. And I don't know about all of you, but I'm finding right now that from moment to moment, my answers are changing. So if I were to ask you all an hour from now, we might have the same group of words, but you might have flip-flopped. And I asked this intentionally as a way of setting context for our conversation today about the biggest trust derailer, which is fear, because whether you're present to it in the moment or just in general right now, the anxiety, the uncertainty that we're all dealing with is very real. Next slide, Tracy. And, unusually in a way, we're all dealing with some very rational fears. Most of the time, as people in consultative roles or people interested in improving our relationships, we're dealing with irrational fears. We've got more than our fair share right now on all of our plates. And while I can offer a little bit of help as I'm learning on pandemic specific fears and issues that are naturally arising for all of us and impacting our work relationships, I can definitely help on the irrational fear front, which are, the kinds of things that show up in all of our relationships. By the way, that's true, especially if we're selling. And if you haven't caught on yet, we are all selling, whether you have sales or BD on your business card, whether you're working in multi-million-dollar accounts, or you're simply on a regular basis trying to be influential and sell your ideas. When we're selling, we have something at stake. And when we have something at stake, then we can feel personally at risk. Oh my gosh, I'm not going to do it right. I might lose the deal, or I might lose the argument, or maybe even more personally speaking, I'm going to be rejected, especially true for those of us who've made a career out of professional services, where what we're fundamentally selling at the end of the day is ourselves. So, it seems like fear, in some ways, it seems like an odd topic to tackle when we're talking about relationship mastery and trust building. And yet in another way, it's not odd at all, because I would assert to you that while absolutely we should be spending time practicing our listening skills and working our mindsets and learning how to conduct better meetings and all those tactical things that we do to make our relationships better, very often what is fundamentally at the source of our ineffectiveness, and when we're just not quite on our game as much as we want to be, or at the other extreme, we just have a big meltdown, breakdown, and you know what hits the fan? What is fundamentally
Where's the other paper that you just wrote on?
at the source? Hi, Marita. is our fear. Yeah, we got it. And by the way, we are all learning. I have no problem with the occasional like pet cam or kid cam or the unmute. We are all, I think, learning how to be very gracious in the face of all the virtual challenges that we're facing. So next slide. Here's what, I don't want you to overthink this. I've got a question for you. I want you to bring to mind a client or a colleague who you find particularly challenging. Don't think too hard and just jot down their first name. We're going to come back to that in a little bit. Next slide, Tracy, if you would. And by the way, another Zoom pro tip, if you're like me and you like being able to see people in gallery view, when you screen share, it kills off your gallery view. So I've asked, Tracy is graciously managing the slide deck for me so that I can stay as present to as many faces as possible. So fear is pervasive, and we're going to look at it in 5 different ways in our attempt to figure out how to deal with it. First of all is to figure out when it's present. When is it running the show? Why specifically does it have such a detrimental effect on trustworthiness? We're going to talk about a construct that Charlie Green created called the 4 sharks of fear. I'm going to share with you what in my view are the 5 sort of tried and true tested strategies for dealing with the typical types of irrational fears that show up for us. And then a little bit on how do we help others manage their own fears. So next slide, if you would, Tracy. Fear is a problem for a variety of reasons. For one thing, it impacts our day-to-day actions and choices. A little over a decade ago, Charlie Green, Stuart Hirsch, and we co-authored a series of blogs during the recession around how do you develop business in the midst of a recession. And one of the themes throughout our blog series was the importance of recognizing that trust is paradoxical. More simply put, it appears to defy logic. And what that means is we have to be willing to take risks when we are the most risk averse. And very often the most trustworthy thing to do in any given moment is the complete and exact opposite of what our first or baser or fear-based instincts will teach us or will inform us to do. And that hurts us, not just in the short term, but it also hurts us in the long term, because those actions that we take can last long past, or the impacts, I should say, can last long past a recession, long past a pandemic, long past a conversation. And fear also, by the way, leading with fear rather than leading with trust, it kills off things like innovation and creativity and all those, especially now, right? Those beautiful silver linings that are being promised to us while we're having to dramatically alter our lives and for many of us, change our work schedules. So next slide, here's my question, because I want to delve into those baser instincts. And my question to you, if you would please chat your answer, is how do you know, like you personally for yourself, how do you know when your baser instincts are running the show? I don't mean your higher level, your more evolved instincts. How do you personally know when your baser instincts are running the show? Like, what's your tell? So we see, Charlie says there's adrenaline and pulse rate. So there's a physical reaction. Terry, you can feel it in your gut. Alan, great insight. You find yourself making excuses. We see heart rate, pulse rate. Oh yeah, a tendency to reach for things that we can control, getting reactive or short-tempered. Feeling it in your chest. For me, it's very often like in the solar plexus area, being defensive, finding that you're shallow, your breathing is shallow. Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. So, interrupting others. Yep, never been accused of that before. So, I find I have a tendency to be overly controlling. I'm always controlling, but overly controlling or attempting to dominate a conversation. Much more in the mode of output, stuff going out for me rather than things coming in. So beautiful. So next slide, Tracy. There are the more obvious tells for us, the physical cues that we get, the energy. Like for me, there's like a part of the nervousness has with it like a fragmented energy, and I'm reacting more so than responding or acting, and I can feel that. It doesn't feel calm and grounded. Or many of you alluded to, you spoke about the emotional reactivity that you feel. And I also think that there are sneakier tells that are the ones, that especially those of us who think we've been working long and hard for decades in our career on relationships, there's the stuff that can creep in without us always realizing it. And some of you see them, you know these already because you've entered them in chat, so kudos to you for that. But, things like if you get a little casual about something, you have a tendency to under-prepare, or one of mine is I have a tendency to procrastinate. I'm a lifelong procrastinator. And, the smoke screen around that is, oh, I've got this. I don't need to work on it until the last minute. I've got it. But that's just a whole bunch of BS, quite frankly. Because what that smoke screen is covering is the fear that's driving the procrastination. It's fundamentally my own fear of failure. And procrastinating and doing things at the last minute gives me a really nice out. Because if I don't do well, or if I fail, then I can always blame it on the fact that I didn't really put my wholehearted self into it in the first place. You might find yourself using big words, or going it alone. I call that lone rangering, or, becoming chameleon-like with your clients. And I don't mean adapting to their styles and preferences in a healthy, service-oriented way. I mean, from a fear-based place, changing who you are in a way that's disingenuous and inauthentic, accommodating, like being overly accommodating. And there are many, many more. In fact, we're going to cover a whole bunch of the other tells so that you have some clues for when this might be in play for you. Next slide. And the reason we do that, I asked you the question about your baser instinct. Tracy, next if you can. I know you may be juggling other things. I asked the question because awareness is a critical first step. So the 5 best practices, those tried and true ones for managing our fears, knowing that it's in play, I think is critical. And if I had to, sort of rank and rate of the 5 the most important to me, this is like 90% of it right here. So, and then what's available once we have awareness, as with all things trusted advisorship, is practice. Because what is available to us to do when we're operating in a fear-based place is, what's available for us is to manage our fears. It's not to eliminate them. They don't go away. We get to choose courage in the face of them, and we get to be masterful with them. Next slide, Tracy, if you will. Here's the question. I think it helps to really understand the phenomena that occurs when fear is running the show. How exactly does fear draw down on our trustworthiness? So enter our old friend, the trust equation. Many of you know this very well. Some of you may be seeing it for the first time, but Charlie Green and his co-authors of the original book, The Trusted Advisor, 20 years ago asserted that our own trustworthiness is a function of 4 things. And the self, S, which stands for self-orientation, is in the denominator. In other words, the higher it is, the lower our T-score. And this is where fear lives.
Hey,
Self-orientation.
I'm going to pause you for 1 second. If anybody wants to learn more about this, we'll send out links. But if you go to trustedadvisor.com/equation, we have a whole page dedicated to this.
Cool. Thank you for that, Jason. Gosh, you just reminded me to take a breath, because I'm like, whoa, I've been on a roll. Right. Taking a deep breath, slowing down a little bit. Self-orientation is fundamentally about our focus. And we can drill that down into 2 specific things. One is our attention. So is our attention over there on them, or is it on us? And guess where it is when we're operating out of fear. And the other thing is motives. That's the other dimension of focus. And that's fundamentally answering the question, why am I doing what I'm doing? Am I doing it as a way to preserve and protect myself? Or am I making a choice, taking an action truly in service of others? The other variables also get impacted, which I'll share with you a few slides down the road, very dramatically when our S is high because our fear is high. And those are credibility, which basically equates to words, what we say and how we say it. By the way, that includes our honesty, not just, you know, what we know and what we can share. Reliability fundamentally is about actions, the extent to which what we do and what we've promised lines up and how quickly we get in communication when there is a disconnect. It's our consistency, predictability, and intimacy, and intentionally provocative word to use in a business setting, which essentially boils down to safety, the extent to which we're able to build a sense of comfort, ease, rapport in our relationships. So they're all impacted when fear is running the show. Next slide, Tracy. I like deep dives, and I really like frameworks because, number one, they help me make sense of things. They help sharpen my awareness so then I can make better choices for self-management. And my favorite all-time framework for managing the irrational fears that show up on an everyday basis in our client and collegial work-wide relationships is based on an article that Charlie wrote some years ago. That he basically called them the 4 sharks of fear. And he talked about how do we ride the 4 sharks of fear, and he named these 4. They are execution, competence, outcome, and shame-based. They get more and more personal as we go down the list. And part of the key is to know when they are running the show. Next slide, Tracy. Execution fear. Execution fear is basically the worry that you might not do it right. And if you are someone who tends to pride yourself on your performance, as I do, you will invariably be challenged at some point, usually in a week, often in a day, by execution fear. And the tells are things like avoiding action, not making the call or sending the email, over preparing, under preparing, passing the buck, charging ahead, procrastinating, micromanaging, being half-assed about something. So that's how we know when execution fear is in play. Next slide, Tracy. Competence fear fundamentally is the worry that we might not know enough. So if you pride yourself on your depth of expertise, as I do, you will invariably be triggered at some point in the month, week, maybe even the day by competence fear. And you'll know that the tells are you find yourself talking too much or using lots of jargon, not talking enough, over controlling the agenda, changing the subject, doggedly debating. And again, remember, these are responses to irrational fears. I don't mean the productive, useful, helpful kind of debate that can advance conversations and help solve problems. I mean the fear-based kind of debate that really is more all about you than all about the people with whom you're engaging. Next slide. If you pride yourself on your track record of success or your win rate, you will find yourself invariably triggered by outcome-based fear, which is the worry that you won't get what you want or need. And the tells are things like pretending you actually don't care, or what I call the Lone Rangering it, the blaming that you also brilliantly identified in the chat box. That tends to come out of a fear of not getting what you want or need. Making excuses, that also was typed in. Making a bad short-term deal because we're so scared that we won't get what we need in the long run. And last one, if you would go to the next slide, Tracy, if you pride yourself on your relatability, as I do, you're gonna get triggered by this one also. Shame-based fear, it seems like an odd word to use in a business context, but it fundamentally is the worry that others won't like or respect you. And you know, shame can show up in really basic ways in our everyday lives. For example, when we feel embarrassed, that's a form of shame, or if we feel self-conscious, that's a form of shame. So, so we see the 4. Jason chatted it, but I'll say it out loud too. Any questions or comments anytime, put them in the chat box, or you can even practice using the hand raise in the participant box. If you have it open at the bottom, you can click to raise your hand and Jason will help me keep an eye on that. But what else I want to say about these 4 is I've noticed in working with them and aiming to master them, lifelong project to be clear, I have a go-to, and I think we all have a go-to. And my go-to is that they might not like or respect me. That's been in place since I started my consulting career nearly 30 years ago. And what I've learned is that it doesn't go away. I still always I want you all to like and respect me, even if you've never met me before. I want that as badly today as I did during my first ever client meeting. What I've learned is to recognize the signs when that's in play and when it could be compromising my effectiveness. Because what happens for me is that means that it will stop me. If I let it prevail, it stops me from saying the things that need to be said, from being the one to assert a challenging or potentially controversial point of view, or being the one to raise a sensitive topic when those things are what is truly in the best interests of the relationship. And I get to make a choice in that moment. Fear doesn't go away. I get to choose whether I choose to lead with my fear or lead with trust. And some of you who've known me, you've been in workshop rooms with me before, you've heard me say things like, I'll use caveats like, okay, you're not going to like me for this. And so that's one of the ways. That's a sign to you. That's the tell that I'm dealing with my own fear in that moment, and I'm finding a way to navigate around it. I also have experienced, as recently as a few weeks ago, while I have a default, and I assert you do too, multiples of these can show up in a single conversation. So look for examples of times when you really struggled to engage with somebody or a group of people. There's a good chance that at least one, if not many, of the fears were in play. A few weeks ago, I was meeting with a leadership team virtually of an organization I've worked with for almost 15 years. I know this organization really well. I am generally very grounded in my knowledge and understanding and my history with this organization. And I was so crazy nervous about this 25-minute call. It was ridiculous. And I realized what was happening was this was with a group inside the organization that I'd never worked with before, and that has a reputation for being particularly challenging to deal with. And all of a sudden, my groundedness in what I know and what I've done, and my clarity around really driving to a result that's best for them, and my commitment to say what needs to be said rather than being like all of that was out the window. And I was consumed by I was consumed by 3 of the 4 fears in play at once. Next slide, Tracy, if you would. What I think, this is a new lens that I was sort of looking through as I was preparing for today. What I realized is I took all the tells and I mapped it to the trust equation. So it tells a particularly damning story, because not only does high fear lead to high self-orientation, which has us behaving in these ineffective ways, but those ways have a tendency to draw down on our credibility, our reliability, and our intimacy all at the same time. So we have a big trust problem. Or maybe it's a small trust problem because it's only slightly niggling at you, but it's the thing that interferes with your ability to take your relationship into a whole nother realm. And that raises the question, well, what do we do? So some answers for that. Next slide, if you would. We already talked about recognizing your fear in the first place. It's 9/10 of the battle. The second one, I normally have these ordered in a different way, but given where we are right now, I've shifted things. I think of what I call getting and staying grounded as it's like a meta strategy for us all right now. What I mean by that is attending to our well-being, our balance, our perspective, just staying as centered as we possibly can. And it's no understatement to say that we are all, as humanity, being challenged to do that in a very major way right now. Service-oriented professionals tend to be tired and stressed, on the verge of burnout a lot. That's a normal state of affairs, but especially now we are at risk. And if you've been in one of my workshops, you know that I have begged and pleaded for you to find those practices in your life to create routines and rituals around them that have you feeling centered and calm and present, whether it's exercise or meditation or art or appreciating art, making art, appreciating music, listening to music, a gratitude ritual, rolling around on the floor with your puppy, playing with your kids or grandkids. I don't care what it is. I care that you do that on a regular basis. And the ninja tip that I have for you today that I'm learning for myself and for the people I've been working with during our current context is like once a day is not enough. So, walks are really popular. Being outside has so many health benefits, assuming we do that safely right now. But a daily walk isn't enough right now. You've got to find small things to do on a regular basis, whether it's, woo-woo sounding things for some of you, like just pausing to take a few deep belly breaths, or taking a time out to do a quick 3-minute guided meditation, or I joke that my cat Sammy, he's now my emotional support animal. Taking a moment to just, pet the cat, listen to him purr. It may sound crazy, but the little things that we can do to get ourselves back into a centered place, well, they've never been nice to haves for trusted advisorship. Now, I would suggest to you it's an absolute mandate. So whatever it takes for you on a regular basis to get and stay grounded will have you be present in, I'm going to butcher this because I don't remember the exact psychological term, but in studying psychology, which I did a bit of in my master's degree in organization development, we talk about, how you can be as much of a blank screen as possible. Like you're not bringing your stuff into your interactions. Next slide, Tracy, if you would. By the way, just because I keep talking and talking and talking doesn't mean you can't interrupt with a question or a comment.
Yeah, I'll pause. So we don't have any direct questions. There's a lot of reinforcing comments to the way you've sliced and diced the trust equation. But if anybody has questions, feel free to put it in the chat, or you can email me, chat me directly, and we'll get these going.
Good, thank you. Side comment, I'm really liking the standing up thing. It's like so much more, I feel so much more like myself in this virtual setting, standing up. So if you haven't tried it, and if you've been struggling with how do you really connect and relate when you can't be with people in person. All right, that was a little tangential comment. The next tip, number 3, is saying it out loud. Dr. Daniel Siegel, he's a Harvard-trained psychiatrist, coined this term, name it to tame it. And I see Amy's face in my Brady Bunch view. Amy, who's joined the webinar, is the person who taught me this phrase for the first time. And that's what I mean by saying it out loud. Name it and tame it means to actually articulate your fear. So, and the physiological phenomenon behind that is that when we actually use words to describe our physiological phenomena, plural, it actually jumpstarts our executive brain, which is our higher order, it's our higher functioning self over our emotional brain. So one simple way that you can use this practice is to simply speak your fear out loud to any other human being. Say it to your spouse, a friend, a close colleague. The ninja tip is to actually say the fear out loud to the source of your fear. That's what's really good at that. That has multiple benefits. It really helps you get unhijacked super quickly. And it also has the benefit, potentially, of building a stronger bond in that relationship, because not only is it an S-lowering move, but it's an intimacy-raising move. I learned this years ago when I started doing professional speaking. And one of my greatest fears is like, I really pride myself on being articulate. So it's a huge fear, especially like becoming a keynoter. Keynoters don't go up on stage with notes. What if I forget what I was going to say? What if I come across as completely inarticulate? One of the things I learned early on is the best way to manage that is if I forget what I was about to say next, is to simply say, holy cow, I have completely forgotten what I was going to say next. And many things happen. Number one, the audience invariably laughs. So suddenly now they're with me. Some empathy gets generated and they can all relate, by the way. I think it's great role modeling for having the courage to be real in moments like that. But it also has the immediate effect of unhooking. So it calms my brain enough that I can actually remember what I was going to say next. And this can happen not just when you're on a big stage, but in a conversation. So if you say, wow, I'm actually, feeling a little bit intimidated by this conversation right now, you could actually say that out loud. Now, how you say it matters. You want to have, as always with trusted advisorship, there's something about having the right blend of both confidence and humility. If you're too modest when you say something like that, well, it can lower people's confidence. It can seem kind of lame, to use a stark word. And if you say something like that with too much bravado, then it just comes across as a bunch of BS. But if you can just genuinely, honestly say from that grounded place, because you've worked on number 2, getting and staying grounded, holy cow, I'm a little embarrassed, I don't know the answer, or I'm worried you're really not going to like me right now for what I think I have to say next, or this is a little intimidating to me. So let's go to the next one, the 4th tip. And it actually occurred to me as I was playing with this new order that this potentially is a good sort of logical order to use. Although there's some steps you might be able to circumvent if your state of hijack isn't extreme. But I find it's really helpful to ask, not just to say the fear out loud, but to ask for help, which is tip number 4. And what I mean by that is get some perspective. So call on your own trusted advisor or simply a trusted friend or colleague and talk through, after you've named it to tame it, talk through what is the worst case scenario here, and what's the impact if that worst case scenario were to come true? And oh, by the way, what's the probability of this worst case scenario? Charlie, in his article about vanquishing fear, used a term I think is just brilliant. He called it right-sizing your fear. And my ninja tip for you when you do this, and one of the things that happens when you do that is you bring a little ration and logic to it, kind of tease it out, think about it, look at it from different angles, is it tends to have a very calming effect. And you start to realize just how irrational your fear really is, which makes it so much easier to manage. And the ninja tip is to actually share any lessons learned from this experience with other people, because you're giving them the benefit of what you're learning. You're normalizing a conversation around fear, fear awareness and fear management. And I think this does many great things, not just for you, but for the people that you work with. So that's tip number 4. Moving on, Tracy, to the next slide. Tip number 5. Jason, I just noticed somebody in the waiting room. So this one, getting the focus back on them. And what I mean is to bring curiosity and generosity to the forefront. Because it is impossible when we're truly in service of other people and focusing on other people, it's impossible in that same moment to be focused on ourselves. And my pandemic priority tips for this one are to do 2 things. One is personal reach outs. And what I mean by that is being in touch with people, clients, yes, but just people in your life right now, for no other reason than to say hello and find out how they are. And if you have a client with whom you've never had that kind of conversation, okay, this is going to sound manipulative and weird. I'm just going to say it the way it came to my head, but you can use the current context because it's less risky right now in our current context to have the courage to go ahead and do that. And we should all be doing that on a regular basis anyway. It's my favorite business development, relationship building practice is just to call people with no specific agenda, because you're leading from your caring. That's low self-orientation. But especially now in the second pandemic prioritized tip related to getting the focus back on them is making generous offers. And I mean, looking at ways that you can, in a concrete way, be helpful and not expect anything in return, not send an invoice for it. I'm not talking about putting your services on fire sale and doing massive pandemic-based discounts and compromising your fee integrity. I'm talking about just doing something simply from a place of generosity, because that's what the moment calls for. No strings attached whatsoever. And what I've learned for myself is whether I'm practicing generosity by sending money to the guy who would have cut my hair a month ago, but I haven't seen him forever, or I'm offering a service to a group of past workshop participants. When I'm in that generous place and when I'm generating that generous place, and I have to generate it sometimes, I don't just wake up every day feeling generous. Mostly these days I wake up feeling anxious. But when I'm in that generous place, like fear cannot coexist. It's like a complete end around to our fear-based state. So those are my pandemic priority tips for this. But as a general priority, how can you, instead of being fear-based, how can you be curious? What did you want to know or understand about the source of your fear, the other person or people that you don't yet know or understand? Or what are some great questions you can ask? Not a list of 42 that you ask in an interrogating way, because usually when we're interrogating, that's another fear-based tell. And oh, by the way, what are they likely afraid of right now in this moment? What's going on for them? And how might you be helpful to them in the face of that? So next slide, Tracy, if you would. Oh, I know. The other thing I was going to say about getting the focus back on them, a simple technique that can be great to use is it's just a simple recap. You're in a conversation or you're in a meeting, or maybe you send an email, you recap your last conversation, or you recap what you understand to be going on for them right now. It's about them in that moment, not about you. So I see we have a question. And it's just to me, Jason, so you don't see it. But what do you do if you fulfilled all requirements, CRAS, but you still did not get the acknowledgement from bosses or clients? I'm looking at it from an independent point of view. Ultimately, I left the company and started out on my own. I think if I understand what you're saying, in other words, you've been doing your very best to behave in the most trustworthy way possible, and you were in an environment that didn't appreciate it. Charlie and I usually give a couple pieces of advice on this. One is, to take, and I'm betting that you probably did this, just a thoughtful, like extra good look at, am I really doing everything I can? Have I taken every risk that there is for me to take to try to alter my circumstances? Because a lot of times we do things, but we don't necessarily stretch. And then if the answer is yes, I've done everything I could, I did a couple steps even beyond what was comfortable for me, and the environment wasn't working, sometimes the most trustworthy thing to do is to close out on a relationship and to move on. I would just encourage all of you to use that as a last step. From a fear-based place, when we're irritated, annoyed, feeling unappreciated, that can feel like the right first step rather than the last step.
Another question, if you want to. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. If you're finished with that one.
No, I was going to go to were you going to go to Scott's comment in the chat? Yeah, many clients getting bombarded with offers and insights. How can someone cut through the clutter to establish a trusted channel to get connected, curious, with a clean motive? Such a great question, Scott. And first of all, the first thing I think that we all have to do is to make sure our motives really are clean. Because, our own fear, especially as, some of us are nearing fiscal year ends. Some of the big global firms have fiscal year ends in May and June, where many of us, unless you're Zoom or Amazon, you're dealing with some very real threats to your business right now. So it can sneak in that we think we're making a generous offer, but we even have like an emotional string attached that says, well, maybe if I do this for them now, when the you-know-what has cleared, maybe they'll be willing to give something to me in return. And I suggest you just got to really work hard to clear all that stuff out, because that's self-orientation in the mix. So first is do the hard work around your own motives. And I think, cutting through the clutter, a couple of thoughts. First of all, you could just do the personal reach out and not make the offer. You could do it in combination. You do the personal reach out and make the offer. You can acknowledge that, holy cow, I know you are getting so many offers right now. And, at the risk of this one being number 127, that just creates noise rather than help, I felt it was my responsibility to reach out to you. So, I think honesty and naming things and being willing to be really real is often the best way to cut through. Noise. Yeah, Bruce says don't reach out if you don't mean it. Absolutely. If you don't really care how somebody is, or you don't genuinely want to risk, what you thought would be a 5-minute call turning into a 30-minute conversation, don't pick up the phone and do it, because your intentions aren't quite in the right place. And we have another comment that says the offer needs to be relevant based on their situation. Research them before bombarding so you understand them more. Absolutely. I said it needs to be concrete and helpful rather than yet another generalized, thing that they already got 40 of. I like to, I'm finding it's helpful if somebody distills something for me. Like I'm getting so many different resources around working virtually and this and that and the other. If somebody I trust distills something and said, here are the 3 things that I've found in the last 3 weeks that have been the most helpful for me, I'm more likely to pay attention to that. So let's go to the next slide. Where are we? So here's my question coming back to the person whose name you wrote down earlier. My question is, which fear of yours is the most prevalent with that challenging client or colleague? Maybe it's in general, it's kind of the one that repeatedly shows up, or maybe it's from the most recent interaction. And my challenge to you is by close of business today, or if you're joining us from the European time zone, by first thing, within the first hour of your work tomorrow, is to do at least tips 2 and 3, something to help you get and stay grounded as this meta practice, and say it out loud, at least with somebody, and then continue down the list. I see a note too from Charlie. The clutter around offers and insights, is around offers and insights. The clutter is not around connected, curious with a clean motive. That's always going to cut through. Yeah, very well said. Very well said. Anything else we have in terms of questions or comments? I do have an eye on time. I want to be mindful. Thank you, Marita, for your comment. Here, let's do, Jason, I'll do the next slide, if you don't mind, and then leave the 2 after for you. Oh gosh, I'm going to do the next 2. I forgot about this one. How can you help others manage their fear? The first thing is we got to get our own house in order. So that's, that noise is not in the mix. And then tune in, practice our masterful listening skills. It might be subtle. The cues might be subtle. They might not be saying, I am afraid. They might be saying, well, we've got to get this handled next week, with a particular amount of sort of bluster and bravado. You got to sense what's underneath that and then acknowledge it, empathize with it. I hear the stress, I hear the frustration. I would imagine if I were in your position, I would be, at least a little bit worried about blah, blah. Do I have that right? So help them name it so that they can tame it. And this goes right back to our 5-word definition of what it means to be a trusted advisor, is fundamentally a safe haven for tough issues. And this is around you being a safe haven for a much broader perspective of tough issues than we typically think, right? We have our own narrow view of our expertise. Sometimes the tough issue to help people grapple with is managing their own fear. So the next one is some resources that are available. You will all be getting an email, by the way, with some links. So much stuff available on trustedadvisor.com, much of it free. We don't really believe in the sign up your name here and in exchange you'll get this, along with a bunch of promotional messages. We've got tons of blogs and ebooks and mini podcasts. I love Charlie's mini podcasts. If you haven't tried them yet, they're usually like 5-6 minutes long. One of the things that many of you know that I do is the weekly tips through the Get Real project. You'll get a link to that as well. Charlie and I have a series called trustedadvisor247.com. That is a paid annual license, but we got 5 free videos that you can access by going out there. No strings attached to that. And then always plenty of stuff on social media. So as you're closing out, we're going to do 2 things. Great quote, Stuart, the Maya Angelou quote. They won't remember what you said or what you did. They'll always remember how you made them feel. As a closeout, I'm going to ask you to do 2 things. One is to chat how you are in 1 word right now as we close this out, avoiding good, fine, and okay to be more descriptive. And the other is to respond to the poll that Jason is going to put up that asks you about the value of this conversation today. I see encouraged, energized, focused, inspired, heartened, enlightened, hopeful, relaxed, nice, better, positive, inspired, and full. Yeah, beautiful. So you see how things can shift just in a moment. And I would encourage you to remember that by managing your fear well and being truly at your best and your best self, you can create these kinds of shifts in a moment for the people who matter to you, both within and outside a pandemic. Okay, now I'm really going to take a deep breath. I can hang out, so we're officially closed out as soon as you've rated the value of the webinar, but if anybody would like to hang out for another 5 minutes, I'm glad to take more questions, comments, whatever is most helpful right now.
Hi, Andrea, it's David Peel. I got to run, but I want to say thank you very much.
Hey, nice to hear your voice. Thank you.
Take care. Bye.
How am I feeling now? Thank you, Mark, for that question. I'm like, it's a made up word. I think I made it up. I'm not exactly sure, but it's how I feel at the end of delivering an in-person workshop or a keynote. And my word is exhilarosted. So I feel simultaneously like exhilarated and tired at the same time. Or like, whoa, it's a burst of energy and focus. Thank you for asking, Mark. Oh, beautiful. Singapore. Yeah, good night. Sleep tight. Glad you could join us. Anybody have any questions or comments? We could just do a massive unmute all.
Andrea, this is Joel Weber. Oh, I'm sorry. This is Joel Weber in Chicago. Hi. Great presentation as always. On helping your clients, sorry, you indicated that assisting with fear is part of being the trusted advisor and the safe haven. Any tips on how to do that without freaking people out that you're condescending to them? Or, you know how intimidated some people are about that?
Yeah, you know, I think two things. I think, first of all, your motives matter. So making sure your motives are clean, that you're not really trying to intimidate or trying to yet it be just another way that you can show off your prowess, your expertise. And I think just being sensitive, using caveats, like, look, you could say things out loud like, this is a little bit of uncharted territory, or this may seem like an unusual thing to say, or at the risk of maybe getting a little too personal in this moment, what I'm really sensing and what I'm hearing you say is there's a lot of stress and anxiety right now. I think if you genuinely convey those things before you actually say the thing, I think it's hard for people to feel like attacked or confronted or intimidated.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome, Joel. Thank you for the question. Anybody else? Just relieved to hear like sound. Nice to be out of the soundproof booth.
Andrea, I love what you did with.
Sorry, go ahead.
Stuart?
Yeah, I loved what you did with the trust equation, that mapping to.
Yeah, thank you.
And it actually explains what I was thinking when you did that. It explains why the S has 3 times the value in the equation, because each one of those elements has a negative side.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, thank you for that.
Andrea, I got a quick question that I found. I'm kind of new as a contractor. It's only been like 4 or 5 years, really. But I've noticed in situations like this, you know, especially when I'm working with a lot of new people because some stuff is shifted around, you're kind of considered an outsider from the organization. So I think it feels a little bit different to reveal personal stuff when you know, to lower your own anxiety. What all people really want to hear about is how you're servicing them.
Well, I think that's true. I mean, I think your points are completely valid. And what I would say is when you're coming in from the outside and when you're new, it feels riskier to reveal those kinds of things. And that doesn't mean you shouldn't do it. And in fact, their trust is positively correlated to risk. The more risk we take, the more trust we tend to build. We call it risk taking because there's no guarantee when you say or do something risky that it's going to turn out well. And again, you know, maybe caveats can help. Look, I realize I'm the new guy or the new gal, or this may be a bit awkward for somebody coming from the outside, or I'm about to, you know, reveal something to you that I wouldn't normally reveal in a new relationship. But I think there are ways around that so that we can, you know, it's like trust building. It's not a linear function. It's not something that happens, you know, bit by bit, step by step over time. It's a step function. And there are ways, there are choices that we can make that can, you know, greatly accelerate the levels of trust, especially in a new relationship. We have to make our choices, right? It's a judgment call in the end for each of us around just how much risk we're willing to take. Anyone else before I officially close this out? Okay, can I get smiles from people who are on camera? Yay, thank you. All right, let's do a quick unmute all so we can hear all our voices saying just goodbye. I'll cue you when I see that we've all been unmuted. Not quite yet. Hold on, it takes a minute. We have so many people. Thank you so much.
I just did it for you.
Right.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Bye, thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye, John.
Everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye.